Welcome to Hip Replacement, the conversation between generations X, Y, and Z. I'm your host, Ben Dietz.
And I'm your host, Kyle Raymond Fitzpatrick. Every week we get together and talk with guests from Gen Z and beyond to try and understand just exactly what's going on in the current moment.
Because we're talking about these generations. Okay, we're back. It's Hip Replacement, episode number 10. Kyle, we've reached the promised land, double digits.
Double digits. Here we are. We did it.
I mean,
again,
so many learnings, so many insights, so many wonderful guests, and, great opportunity for us to go post-mortem after the fact, and we can optimize, in the vein of all of the social media trends out there.
Break it
anyway,
up. Yeah.
We're joined by Abha here today. Kyle, how did we come to talk to Abha?
Yeah, so Abha runs a really fantastic newsletter called Girl Online, which is sort of about like digital girlhood, and I really enjoy Abha's writing and sort of like who she makes space for. But then also, like, I think it's a really good sort of summation and or like statement of the times, and I think she does a really good job sort of speaking about like what girlhood is online right now, because it's a very hot subject in general, and I think it's sort of, it's a great read. I love it. So welcome, Abha.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
So, and Abha, we were talking off mic. This is your first time on a podcast.
Yes, this is my first time ever on a podcast. I'm so excited.
Okay, well, hopefully we won't terrify you away from the format, and you'll appear on many podcasts going forward. The other thing that I thought when I asked you off mic where you were, expecting you to say, "Oh, I'm in London," or "I'm in, I don't know what, Cleveland," or something like that, but you're not in either of those two places. Where are you?
I am in Kerala. It's in India, and it's a wonderful place.
I mean, I have visited India a couple of times, but have gone to Mumbai both times, and so have not been to Kerala. But it is where in India is Kerala sit?
Kerala, I live in Trivandrum. It's almost close to the southernmost point in India.
Okay, got it.
Wow. Okay.
It's along the coast.
Cool.
Fabulous.
Well, someday, Kyle, we'll get to Kerala and get to visit.
I'm dying to go visit India. I have some friends here. Little plug for a restaurant in Barcelona called Mog, which is Goan cuisine. And my friends are from Goa, and I've learned a lot about the region and a lot about the food and the culture. And I'm like, I gotta go one day.
Well, okay, so that actually brings us to kind of in a way straight into the first story that we want to talk about, which is the story about the what do you call it, like the death of the millennial dream or something to that effect. So Drew Austin, who writes the Kneeling Bus newsletter, has a new column for Vice.com, which of all places, and in it he writes about millennials kind of becoming coming to the realization that they don't own anything because they live in the internet, which I thought was kind of, I mean, it's a very astute observation in a certain way, and it is underpinned by this notion of like we as a millennial group, not me because I'm too old for that, but we as a millennial group are coming to the realization that we don't that the castles we have made for ourselves are all built sort of digital sand, right? They can all be taken away or can all fade into the thing. I have some very strong Gen X feelings about this argument, Kyle, but I'm interested to know, and Kyle, what you guys thought about this reading it, because it seemed to have sparked a lot of attention last week.
Interesting. I thought it was a good read. I enjoyed it. I think I didn't think there was anything that was new or like made me think, oh wow, that's like truly different. I feel like I've sort of written around these subjects too, but I think that sort of idea of like the digital sand and like a lot of millennial culture, and I would be intrigued about your take if like Gen Z and beyond actually as well sort of might have a similar sort of feeling, because like that's sort of something that like I talk about with a lot of people, having been through the various cycles of the internet, from AOL Instant Messenger through MySpace through early Facebook, Vine, all the way to now. Like there's so many things that sort of have like risen and fallen. And like I've told this to people a few times in the past few weeks, is that like, I'm at a point, say with Substack, Trend Report, etc. And we all probably in various ways are coming in and out of this space where it's like, yeah, very fortunate that like things are going well and that like there is a bit of an eye on that. But like understanding how the internet works to the point of sand, et cetera, is like, I'm aware that like one day it'll probably go away. Like I'm aware that like this is of a moment, and like it's of a moment that like for me personally, I need to sort of like not necessarily cash in, but like do what I can to make sure that like when the sands change, I have sort of like firm footing in whatever, not whatever comes next, but just like not letting it go with the wind, if that makes sense. So that's very much on the mind because I feel like you know that from having lived a life in the sand, say, because millennial internet, etc. But Abha, what do you think about like as far as say like with younger generations? I feel like this is something that like doesn't need to be reckoned with yet, but like it will, I think, at some point.
So, like, small context, even though I'm like born in the 2000, like, I was born in December 2000. So, I'm like very in between that sort of like batch. But since I'm based in India, and it's only very recent that like the larger culture in the US started reaching here lifetime. Like, something happens there, we get to know as well, right? So, when I was growing up, even as a Gen Z, I grew up with like millennial culture. I grew up reading Harry Potter on Tumblr.
Yeah.
Death of the millennial culture, I feel like is death of my like preteen teen years as well.
Yeah.
But on the question of, I think it is very like, I mean, it's just not millennials. I think are losing their identities on the internet. For Gen Z, I think it's even more profound because we're running after trends. I don't think that my generation has a very like super established notion of online identity. We sort of keep going back and forth according to like what's the trend, at least the larger thing. Either your identity is all about following the trends or your identity is like going really like just opposite whatever the trend is. So I think yeah, I mean, it's just really strange. I was reading the article, it was very strange. I was thinking about it like, I mean, we were initially taught that everything on the internet is permanent, but I feel like the internet is like making us feel like nothing is permanent, even in real life. So that is sort of there. And I've tried to touch upon this topic a few times in my newsletter as well, but I never really got around to it because it's so confusing. It's giving me an existential crisis.
Welcome to the club. Welcome to the club.
Well, so okay, I guess from my perspective, reading it was interesting. So first and foremost, the title of this article, which is an obituary for millennial culture, and then goes IPAs, escape rooms, listicles, smash burgers, Garden State, which is where my hackles get raised because Garden State was actually written by a college classmate of mine. So it's very and a friend who's and you know very much like it's as far as I'm concerned, that's Gen X. Whether or not you experience that as a millennial, that's a Gen X statement right there, my friends. It's about a Gen X guy. Right. But in reading all of this stuff, it made me, I guess, as I read it, I was just struggling a little bit to empathize or sympathize because the argument is sort of like, woe is us. We have our past is, you know, sifting away through the digital, you know, as digital sand, and we don't own anything to hold on to. And I think we've talked on this pod a bunch of times about, you know, the reaction that younger people, Gen Z, may have towards physical items, physical totems, wanting to have evidence, essentially proof of life through physical objects that they collect, or returning to old media, be it vinyl or magazines or whatever. But the thing that struck me about this was the argument is essentially like the things that we thought were guaranteed aren't guaranteed. And so now we feel adrift. And I get brought back to my being a younger person and just being like, nothing was ever guaranteed. Like who told you that? Like, that's just wrong. And the reason that I was talking about Carola as a starting point for this is that what it occurs to me is that really what we will inevitably see is millennials and Gen Z people who figure out how to take the capital that they do have, and I mean cultural capital, and I mean literal like monetary capital, and they will find a place to carve out space for themselves, whether it is on the southern coast of India or whether it is in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, where I was over the weekend, where it's a thriving community. Like, I don't want to live there, but it's a thriving community. Like,
yeah,
you're going to figure it out. And so these sort of odes to loss are they feel a little empty to me.
I mean, I feel like this sort of ties into a bit of what you were saying, Abha, is that like the thing that sort of comes to mind for me is that like that I think is perhaps unique to millennials and definitely is unique to Gen Z, because I feel like I hear it a lot from them, is that like I think this sort of like what was promised, quote unquote, is really just sort of a reaction to and or regurgitating of what like media narratives. Because I think that is sort of unique to, say, millennials, is that like, or I see it more with Gen Z, but like I know it's a millennial thing too, where what you saw in, say, the movies especially, and like a lot of media sort of like dictated what adulthood was, but then being in adulthood, it's a completely different sort of sensation. Like, you thought something was going to switch one day and you would feel established, grounded, etc., but like that's not true. That's like a movie fantasy that a lot of people bought into. And like I think a really good example, that's why you have trends on like, say, TikTok, where people are like, well, this is my mom's first time living too, and it's like, yeah, like that's sort of an understanding of like these sort of narratives and ideas that your parents or older people are perfect is not true. And I think that is like, it's funny because like, yes, I think that like all generations are very intelligent, et cetera, but like there is a sort of like drinking the Kool-Aid that like that is unique, I think, to millennials and Gen Z, that like they believed a lot of literal fantasy and maybe just like nonfiction stories as well to be the truth of like, well, Patrick Bateman had a lot of money, he was successful, he's a serial killer, he's a fiction satirized serial killer of like,
is he though, Kyle?
Well, not anymore, because people want to be him, and that's what I mean, is that like people then anyway.
What I mean more so is in American Psycho, is he actually a serial killer, or is he just imagining all of it?
Fair.
So, Abha, one question I have for you is like, you are on the one hand catching up to this at an accelerated pace, right? As you were describing earlier. On the other hand, I wonder to what extent all of this is like the late capitalist, experience, and to what extent any of it is you see it reflected where you are, or if you see it reflected globally in the kind of girlhood that you write about. Because I wonder if it's just a symptom of Western late capitalism.
No, pre-2020, I used to feel like there is a huge gap between like how pop culture is like evolving in the US and back here in India. But I think post the pandemic, the bridge is almost like that gap has been bridged. Like there is no, there is no, like we get everything live time, and then like we follow the same pop culture things.
Right.
And like I remember like there are a lot of things that I still catch up on that is like quintessentially millennial or Gen Z, but from a younger age, but not since like 2020. I have had to. But that being said, like your question about late stage capitalism, I feel like that's so real. Because when you see these stories in movies, you have this idea that this is fiction. But on the internet, you're not looking at fiction. You're looking at real people who claim to have achieved so many things at such a young age. And that kind of creates like I don't know if I can call it peer pressure, but it's just really weird. Like we don't necessarily register that this is also a performance. Because it's taken for granted in like movies and stuff, novels, fictionalized stuff. But on the internet, you really have to like put a conscious checkpoint. Like this is performance. This person is performing for you. This is not real, and that can be like really difficult at times.
And that, I think, like that is exactly the center of the problem, is because like with the introduction of social media, that sort of is, I think, where that blurring of like, well, movies are real sort of happen. Like to that point is that like so much, and I think people forget this, but like so much of the internet and what we post on the internet is a glamorized version of what life is. You don't see the credit card debt people are in when they go to Tulum every week or whatever the fuck. But like that is like for the gram is just to make things look good. You're not posting like I am $50,000 in debt and that like, my siblings stopped talking to me and my dog just died. I'm making this up, but like those things you don't hear about because like it's kind of too real. And then as a result of that, there is a sort of feeling of peer pressure that is sort of like what FOMO has evolved into, where it's just like, I think we talked about this a few times where it's just like no one is requiring you to spend $600 to go see Beyonce. No one. You are, because you heard people are doing it too, and you want to as well. I think there's sort of like a severe to all of that. Like there's a severe sort of like lack of self-control or just like saying no that sort of comes with this participation, which then I think sort of like gets into that territory of like, well, why don't I have these things? It's like, well, because those things aren't real. All these people are lying. All these people are pretending to be rich. Everybody's scamming. Everyone's scamming. That's what it is.
Is it scamming when everybody does it though? Is it? I mean, that's a deeply rhetorical question, but it's sort of like, is it scamming or is it just the lingua franca of?
It's exactly. It's
the digital ecosystem.
The digital world is fake it till you make it. Everybody is faking it, and that's fine. But you have to realize that.
Well, okay, so that actually brings us to an interesting point to go to one of the things that Abha pointed out, which was the idea of ChatGPT therapists and whether or not they make us all narcissistic. I have thoughts, but tell us about this a little bit because you explore it pretty extensively in a Girl Online edition.
I think it all starts with I feel like my generation has a compulsive need for reassurance. We're all so lonely. We just need constant reassurance. It can be from a friend, it can be from somebody else, and then when that is not available, then we go to the next best thing, that is ChatGPT. It's available all the time as well. You need reassurance at 3 a.m. It's there for you.
What do you need reassurance for, though, or of?
It's just, I think we all just live in our microcosm, and it's real that we're all lonely in general compared to perhaps the older generations, and then there is all of this. A part of it also comes from the armchair psychologist as well. You need to choose yourself. You need to always put yourself first. Boundaries, and then these terms get thrown around a lot. And then at some point you realize that you only have boundaries. There is nobody inside your boundaries because your boundaries are too close to yourself. And then you.
Oh, that's interesting. That reminds me a little bit of growing up so I grew up in a culture of straight edge and vegetarian. It was essentially, we all started skateboarding, then we got into punk rock, then we got into hardcore, then we got into straight edge hardcore, then we got into, then all the bands became vegetarian, then they became vegan, then they became hardline vegan. And at a certain point, you could just see people, I'm cutting out, red 36 because it's got ladybug shells in it and it's not vegan accordingly. You just got to the point where you realize okay, I'm putting more and more boundaries around myself, exactly as you're describing, Abha, to the point where I won't be able to do anything. But I've never heard it put as I've got nothing but boundaries. That's a really succinct observation. Anyway, please continue.
And then AI therapists or ChatGPT really plays into that narrative that's already set by like I said, TikTok psychologists. You are the best. You really have got it all together. You know everything. So that's kind of what ChatGPT does as well. It's yes, you're right. Whatever happens. So there's an anecdote I shared in the Girl Online issue where I was clearly wrong. I should not have been that rude to anybody, let alone a friend. But then I came and said to ChatGPT, was like, no, you're protecting your boundaries. You're such a queen for doing that.
That's the word. You're such a queen for doing that.
Did it really say queen?
It did, because initially I'd asked him. I asked ChatGPT to be
refer to me as queen.
My best friend. Yeah, be my snarky best friend. And then he was like, yeah. But now I have a separate chat just to be extremely critical. Anything I say, I'll counter that. But now I have that set. But initially I did not. So then I was like, see, there are some things that you're wrong. I might be coming to you for reassurance. Honestly, I was going to ChatGPT to ask me how can I get better at this? how can I like not be mean to people? And it's like, be mean to people. That's really good for you. So that's how it started. And then I went reading and everything. And that's when I came across a framework like where these chatbots are trained to reassure you. They're like, yes, that's correct. What else?
Mm-hmm.
So that kind of feeds into this narrative. Yes, it can. I think it can absolutely make my generation narcissistic. I mean, we're already like big on like dodging accountability, right? So
Sure.
Mm-hmm.
bring these AI chatbots in, then we're looking at this sort of a framework where I do anything, I go to ChatGPT, it validates it, and I kind of like, oh yeah, I am right. And then I kind of like feeds on that and continue to like enforce that kind of behavior with like no checks and no kind of like, so like, okay, when I went and told my best friend what I did, she kind of scolded me on that. She's like, what is wrong with you? Why would you do that? This is not
Right.
okay. So you don't have that human checkpoint.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I think I consider myself like not a lonely person. I have a lot of friends. And if I am so addicted to ChatGPT, I am concerned about people who are more introverted, people who have
Right.
difficulties socializing. Like ChatGPT might actually become your go-to sort of like emotional therapist. Like I
Mm-hmm.
asked it to be my best friend, it could actually become their best friend. What
Right.
does that happen? Like people sitting in their microcosms, people thinking they're right, and like nobody ever correcting that. It's just that's just a weird point to be
I
in.
mean, like those things are actually happening. Like they're not just like a sort of theory. Like there are, granted, like, they're sensational stories, but like they do happen, and like they happen across the spectrum of age and
Right.
generation. But I think the sort of key, the nucleus of it, to your point, Abba, is that like it's a lot of, say, like people who are sort of lonely and or not necessarily spiraling, and not necessarily somebody who could get out of it. They could, but like just somebody who's sort of like in a specific sort of place and context where they become sort of codependent to slash with a chatbot or an AI sort of entity. And I think that, we're hearing more and more stories. Like the trending one of the past week was about like, AI religious psychosis and people sort of seeking some information sort of the things that you're talking about, Abba, but like sort of coming to the realization or conclusion that they are sort of like divine, like somewhat literally, and like having a bit of, say, not a mental breakdown, but not a mental breakdown, and sort of
Right.
trying to of having
Well,
this sort of false sense of reality.
the way it just encourages their psychosis.
Yeah.
Listening to all of this reminds me that ultimately it's like if the AI is a machine for yes, essentially, if the machine
Mm-hmm.
if it's an answer machine, if the answer should always be yes, or it should always be yes, and if it's a machine for more, and so the answer is always yes, the end result is always more. It does make your ability to endure discomfort less, right? Like
Right.
it's not even. It's interesting because I don't know that I would necessarily frame it as narcissism so much as I would frame it as just like mental flab, right? Like I don't want to. Don't want to call people weak because that's not right. That's not what I'm saying. But it does seem to, it weakens your ability to be self-determinate because you just you are dependent on that validation all the time. That's what you're getting at, I guess, right?
Yes, yes. I mean, it's a larger cultural shift as well. It's not just with ChatGPT. Recently, there was a story on, I don't know which platform wrote it, but like the story on like how people are swiping on dating apps just for like that validation. They're not going out on dates. They're not talking to these people.
Mm.
They just start swiping on dating apps to kind of like be like, oh yes, I'm still desirable. What is my market value, right? So that still goes
Damn.
on. And it is a larger, and I say a lot. There has been a lot of like astrology apps as well popping up
Mm-hmm.
post, I think like 2022, because like there is a lot of chaos and you are obviously confused, you are scared what's happening, and there is this constant need for reassurance. So like it's a larger cultural shift in my
Mm-hmm.
opinion.
Yeah, I don't know, and you see that I mean, obviously your eye with Girl Online is to the world, right, and young women everywhere. But do you see that as prevalently in the culture immediately around you in India and Kerala as you do across the world through your feeds?
Yes, yes, absolutely. I mean, the dating app thing I see in my friend group. first person experience. None of my friends go on dates anymore. They just like fish for
Oh,
validation.
you need to be dating. Go out.
Yeah, I mean something. Okay, so that then gets to another story that you sent us, which is around, is Girl Moss over, and have we all gotten back to the grind? I mean, to talk about, what do you mean by that? Like, where does that question come from specifically?
Post, I think the pandemic, all of us were very tired, and we were like, oh, like we were all inside, and we finally experienced, I think, in a way, how life is meant to be lived. We were all, doing work. We were all working out. We were all making coffees,
Mhm.
weird recipes for coffees,
Right.
baking, just about really living life. And then when the world opened up, we were like, oh, I'm not going to go back to the grind. There was all kinds of stuff. Quiet quitting, slow living. I think it was like sloth living as well. Slow living
Slot
had,
living.
yeah,
I don't
you
know if I
just
know that
barely
one.
live. You're
Oh,
so
okay.
tired, you barely live.
Bed
Sloth.
rotting.
Yeah.
Yes,
Oh,
bed
sloth
rotting,
living.
exactly.
Yeah,
Damn.
bed rotting. Okay,
I
got it.
Bed,
haven't
Sure,
heard
now I
bed
of
understand.
that.
rotting,
Bed
girl
rotting,
rotting.
yes.
It was these,
Yeah.
lots of terms going around, and we were like, okay, there is no need to like this is late stage capitalism. I am disengaging from late stage capitalism. I'm not doing that anymore. This and that. And then end of 2024, I think, maybe early 2024 as well. There was like a shift. I think what was that? The Cut, I think, did a story on the office chick. That I think was like
Mm,
the shift. We
right.
were all like slow living and working from our pajamas and like working from home, and then suddenly we're back to like girl bossing. We're being the office chick. We are corporate, whatever. And then there was that speech by Timothy Chalamet. I'm not sure which award ceremony where he was like, he's ambitious and he wants to do stuff, something of that sort. Yeah, and then my entire Twitter feed was like, yes, bring back ambition, bring back the grind, let's all hustle again. And then like, oh, okay, that did not last very long.
I mean, I have to.
Yeah.
I'm sort of agog at this. I have to be honest, and mainly because, like, I know some of the people involved in, not with Timothée Chalamet, but with like that Cut story, and like they are as fallible and
Mm,
and when I say bias, I mean bias in the way that everybody is biased, not in some sort of like prejudiced way. But they are fallible, they are biased, they are subjective in a way that is very specific to this little community that I live on the outskirts of in New York City, right? Which is not America, which is not the Western world, which is not the whole world by any stretch of the imagination. And the idea that that story resonates as crisply as it does with you in Kerala is, I mean, I'm shocked, to be honest, but I'm not surprised. I'm shocked, but I'm not surprised.
yeah.
I think what Americans don't register is that English is the primary language of the internet that we use. Like my
Yeah.
native tongue is Malayalam, which is not very much used on social media, at least in my circles. And so, since English is the primary language, all of the pop culture that we consume, all of the memes we consume, everything is your cultural capital.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
we kind of like are really like engaged. I remember this. I think this one tweet that had gone viral. It was on my feed. It was like this person saying they wanted to study Spanish or Italian or something, so they can like finally move away from like always consuming American pop culture and then move on to like some other like language.
And then did you send them ballerini cappuccino? And that,
I do not know what that is.
oh,
Oh my
okay,
God,
good.
don't look it up.
It's yeah.
Don't look it up.
Oh my
Save
God.
yourself from
This-
some AI
this-
slop. Don't look it
Yeah,
up.
this is, I have to say, so right, it's Italian brain rot slop on TikTok, and it's funny. So
Don't
at the
look it
volleyball
up.
tournament over the weekend, my daughter said to her friend, she's like, yeah, my dad is up on TikTok slang. He knows what's going on. And I said,
Right.
yeah. I said TSPMO, and her little friend thought that was just so funny.
Another like
The,
contextual information.
yeah, please.
We don't have access to TikTok. TikTok is banned in
Oh,
India.
yeah.
Right,
Right,
right.
yeah.
That is a huge, yeah, okay. Because I was going to say, like, to the point of, I try to stress this a lot in my newsletter. To exactly your point, Abba, is that like the internet largely is the American internet. Especially if you have TikTok, like that is the like conversation, is the Americans are driving it. So like that is something I think a lot of people forget, and like this is something that is happening more and more, I think, for the worse. Is that, like, for example, I was literally talking to my aunt and uncle about this yesterday. If you're listening, hello, Colleen and Michael. When I was in Paris, I was in Paris like 2 weeks ago, and there was this feeling of like, this could be anywhere. And like, I hadn't had that feeling in Paris in a long time. Like, that's true of a lot of cities, and always has been that sort of like suburban creep. But that was a very unique thing where like, I wouldn't be surprised where all of our three respective, Ben in the US, me in Spain, Abha in India, there are probably some things that just like exist now in all of these places that are the product of the internet. Like, you have these tea shops, you have these specific aesthetic coffee shops, these specific sort of like vintage style stores, and like they're all sort of reaction to online culture. And like what that means is that then like the local culture is then being sacrificed. And often all these things are happening in English. Everybody's working there speaks in English, not because they want to. It's just it's the culture. And so like that is something that like, a lot of places kind of struggle with. And I think it's going to become a larger conversation as it crashes into over tourism. But that's a larger soapbox I can stand on. But like it's true. Like that's a real thing. And I don't think Americans really sort of take a step back and go like, oh, we've like culturally colonized a lot of places, and we didn't learn another language, so they can get us more than we can get them in that way.
I mean, I think the interesting thing, the fascinating thing for me, and Abba, I'd be interested to know what your thought on this is. The fascinating thing for me is that the American, let's call it propaganda system, intelligence system, does know that, has known that for many years, has worked to exactly that end for, a century, ever since there became mass media that could be broadcast across, international lines. The thing that is happening at the moment, though, here is that the Trump administration is cutting back on funding for all of those sorts of communication organs. And so instead, what happens instead of Voice of America being the thing that delivers the American point of view, it's it's brain rot, it's Hawk-Tuah, it's, I mean, like what you just said to me earlier, and maybe Hawk-Tuah is not the right example because it was, it started with the TikTok thing, but like, Abba, if you told me you knew who Hawk-Tuah was, that would just distress the hell out of me. But then I would I understand.
I do.
Yeah. Okay. Now
I actually the whole origin story, and I've been thinking about there are these meme-ish personalities in the Indian internet as well. So I've been thinking of doing like a story on them, so that like it's not just your Hokzoa and then like all of those, we have our people as well.
Yeah.
So I've been thinking of doing a story like that. Yeah.
Well,
unfortunately, I do.
The idea that Haley Welch is now, the American, effectively the American Minister for Culture, is it's somewhere between deeply distressing and, at the very least, like an unproven quantity. Who knows? She might be very cerebral and very bright. I don't know. I don't know the woman, but all signs point to no.
Her online performance says otherwise. That's what I will say.
So, but it just I am, like I said, surprised, or I'm not surprised, but I am shocked somewhat to hear that it has that level of traction.
I think the perception about Americans have also changed.
Talk about that a little bit, yeah.
Yes, like from I think initially when I was young, you all were like, the American dream, right? Very hardworking people, freedom loving, this and that. And we see Americans as dumb now. You're like, oh, they're dumb.
I mean, I don't know that I don't know that we're in present company accepted, or I don't know if we're if beating that allegation.
Yeah,
most of the time. I think that was also why people were so surprised to see an American pop. I mean, it was very difficult for me to accept.
Yeah.
I wanted to see, since we consume so much of your cultural capital, we don't see Americans as exotic, even though it's very foreign, very far away.
Sure.
But say Europeans are very exotic for us. Latin Americans are exotic for us. So in my eyes, the Pope has to be exotic. He has to be European or like Latin American. And my first thought process was that we have a Pope whose first language is English. It's weird.
Yeah.
I
mean,
not only that, but he's one who's had a hoagie. Anyway, sorry.
But like but like, yeah, the Pope, I think, is a really good example of exactly that. And like, I think that is, I look, the Catholic Church is not dumb. They play in long, epic speed versus of the moment. And like,
Yeah.
it's unsurprising to me that like it's hitting at this time exactly to the point of what you're saying, Abba, of like everybody sort of knows and thinks about the church and the Pope and blah blah blah, but also that like this is a really sort of fragile time for and fragile time, but also a time when all eyes are on the United States. So like it is unsurprising to me that like less a say shadow president enters the picture, but more that like it is in conversation with power. And like that is sort of what I think what is happening. It's easy to forget that. Like this is like peak American power time. So like that thing sort of like that's unsurprising to me. And it's surprising that people are so surprised. But the other thing too, and I think, to the point of, your work, Abba, and like my work and everybody's work in a lot of places is that like a lot of it is in conversation with the United States. Like I will tell people, I live in Barcelona. Tell people that like, oh, I moved here from Los Angeles, and 9 times out of 10, they look like me like I'm crazy because they're like, I want to go there. Why did you leave? Like that is the place where like you can like make a living. Like what are you talking about? And like part of me is like, that's true. Like there are a lot of things like I did give up to leave, but like that's a sort of thing is like until that sort of facade has truly crumbled to the sort of like they're dumb, it's still going to sort of like be in that domain because like you can make an American dream come up if you're not sort of contending with say fascism, but like yes.
So that actually brings up an interesting question to me, and Abba, when I visited India, which is in 2009, 2010, something like that, so a generation ago, it didn't feel to me like that sort of American dream style journey of self-improvement and eventual passage to success was necessarily possible because of caste boundaries and that sort of thing. Has that changed? Or alternately, do you go, well, in order for me to achieve that dream, I have to go someplace else, right? I have to go to Europe, or I have to go to America, or something like that. Don't feel obligated to speak for all of India here, because clearly, we're all individuals. But I'm just interested to know what your read on that is.
I think the dream of going to North America or Europe and like making a living is still a very like an upper class dream for most Indians. There is a huge, I think, a barrier in terms of like finances, in terms of cultural capital. Not all, like, even though English is one of the prominent languages used here, not all people can have that kind of, they don't have that kind of a proficiency in the language. They don't have that kind of like exposure. So definitely an American dream is an upper class dream for sure. And maybe it has penetrated to like say the upper middle class or just the middle class, but not a very common thing either. But then these are the people who have the capital of the cultural capital to be loud on the internet as well. So it can like come up as like, oh, everybody wants to like go. I mean, obviously, I think people have that dream because it is still like promoted as that, like, place where you can go and make a living. And I think one of the important things that people consider at the moment is like, it's sort of like an ROI. People think that with the same money and everything, you're getting better benefits in Europe, walkable cities, or I'm not so sure. Again, this is from the other side, right? I do not know what is exactly going on here. I just have like a picture. So say walkable cities, better, like infrastructure and this and that. So this is what people now prioritize. They know that like, oh, you move there and you hustle and you become a millionaire. They know that's not true. But at least there is like this hope for better infrastructure. They say your children get better education, or you get better benefits, better healthcare, whatever. It's more on Europe than the US, because like that facade has sort of come down. People know that the US is not the dream anymore. I think for Indians right now, Germany is the first, like,
Interesting.
because like they don't have tuition fees in most of their private, like in their public universities. So that really brings down the finance, like that barrier.
Right. The barriers, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's that is fascinating, and to think to some degree it's because of how dumb people are on social media, that Germany wins because Chinese social media infects America with brain rot.
Yeah.
Maybe that's the headline of our podcast.
Well, I was going to say, like, because the thing that sort of is ironic and not is that, like, in a lot of ways, like, everything that sort of, like, Abha, you're saying that I've also experienced too, being outside of the country, is that, like, a lot of these sort of, like, dreams or ideas of a place that were really good soft power skills that were, or like really good, cultural warfare, quote unquote, things are being broken down by the people who propel it. Meaning that, like, all these sort of Trump things of like trying to say like export culture and or protect their own culture and like being super nationalist is ultimately hurting this sort of messaging that was really propelling a lot of things. And like it's like this funny tweet I saw somebody said about like fucking Trump giving asylum to white South Africans, and like someone was like, wow, he's like decolonizing that country. If like he's able to get enough people out, he has decolonized the colonized place, which is like so funny. And like obviously that will never actually be to that extent, but like that is a very hilarious idea. But again, like it gets to this like, undoing a lot of whatever. But like that's like funny.
It's succeeding by failure.
Yeah,
congratulations.
Exactly.
Congratulations.
And for better and worse for parties involved. But yeah, anyway.
Oh my God. So Abha, we're coming to the end of the conversation, but I wanted to just, you write about young women online through your newsletter. What do we not know right now about what's going on with the girlies that will come to the fore soon, or that we should be aware of?
Good question. It's a lot of like scattered information in my brain. That is a good question. I need to like maybe open up my idea dump and be like, what are we gonna talk about?
Yeah. Kyle, what comes to mind for you with that question? Because it might spark it. Oh, go ahead, Abha.
Yeah, I think one, like a change, an evolution that I'm seeing is that post Trump's re-election, the internet has gotten like even more misogynistic. It has gotten even more angrier towards women, and we're all making the shift to a private internet. So these closed communities only for women, sort of like not
interesting,
not being on like say Instagram or Reddit or TikTok or any of these mainstream social media platforms, and just going for like Discord channels just for women. Or I think there is this one very interesting social media platform called DM coming up from the US itself. It's sort of like a Reddit for women.
I don't know. Say it again. What's it called?
It's DIEM. DM. I
DM.
think it is.
Okay, got it.
Yeah.
Yeah, have you heard of that, Kyle? I've never heard of
that. I feel like I've heard of
It's
a
on
few
that
like sort
side.
of like
maybe
female
that's
centered
by
online
design,
things, but like
right?
yeah,
Like,
I'm
definitely not the demo, but it's interesting.
Yeah.
Okay,
They
so
don't
sorry,
have
Abha,
staff.
please continue.
They write a newsletter as well. That's how I found them. The writer who writes Embedded is the same person who writes DM. So.
Oh, Kate Lindsay.
Oh wow.
I forgot her name.
Huh.
Yeah, so Kate Lindsay. Interesting.
Yes, Kate Lindsay. She writes the same newsletter for them. It's very interesting. It's this platform where just women goes and asks questions and like stuff about life. Just Reddit in general, how Reddit works. So you go and ask questions and other women answer you. And it's really interesting to be there because nobody's calling you entitled. Nobody is like diminishing, like, oh, these are all like, this is not even problems. Do you know what is happening around the world? It's just so respectful and everybody is nice to each other. I really like being there. And there is a bunch of other platforms as well coming up. I've been thinking about writing about it, but then there is this shift towards the private internet. So it's based on the internet.
That's really that's fascinating that a shift towards misogyny globally, or a perception of misogyny globally, that I mean it makes total sense that it would drive that result. It's just for those who are maybe not in the crosshairs of that, that change, we don't notice it, right? Why these conversations are so important, to just kind of get a sense of what's out there.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that's like the dead on, Abha. Like that's definitely sort of where a lot of digital spaces are going to go, not just for women, but for many, say, minority groups and many sort of others, because of that, and because of like the the whole like, well, am I going to get checked at the by the fucking border patrol when I come into the country because I said XYZ thing. There's that, and there's like, oh, there's something else I had to this that I'm just forgetting. But like, I feel like there's a lot of this sort of energy around sort of like really reinforcing your community spaces and doing it in private, offline kind of ways that sort of really help people thrive outside of that noise. And I think that's probably why I say a lot of offline programming happens now, because to the point of everything online being fake is like that sort of, those things can be used against you in the quote unquote court of law. So get offline and sort of protect each other is what sort of the vibe is, I feel.
Yeah. Interesting. Or even in the case of DM, something that's not offline, but is just offline.
Yeah.
It's like
Yes,
off Broadway.
yes. And the funny part is that it's not just happening in the US, right? It's happening all over the world. Even in India, we have a right-wing government, and it's just like it's just not that the growth of nationalism, that the growth of like traditional gender roles along with this is just like made men angrier. And I feel like and I feel like they are finally like feeling the brunt of patriarchy, but they do not know where to go. They do not know who to be angry on. And they're like, oh, we are the people who are facing all this, so you guys must be the ones who are creating these problems. And then it's weird.
That is fascinating. I mean, it's not necessarily even feeling the brunt of patriarchy so much as feeling the brunt of a kind of a parochial mentality that is, has acted in the background for a long time, but is now actually demonstrating and showing itself in overt terms and making no bones about it. Fascinating.
Yeah. I mean, really quickly, the thing that I was going to say that I remember now is like, if we look at, say, the data of like the difference between young people, let's say Gen Z men and women, is like that sort of ideological gap. And I would not be surprised if it's echoed worldwide, is so huge of like what their values and their point of view on things are. Like, and I think that is going to supercharge that sort of like creating quote unquote safe spaces and private spaces even more. And like, I wrote about this last year at some point, and like kind of as a joke, but like it's becoming more and more real, is like seeing things emerge, like say lavender marriages and sort of like countercultural forms of like long-term relationships sort of emerging. What's
a lavender marriage?
A lavender marriage is like, I mean, it's sort of like an old school term for like when a, say, gay man and a straight woman would get married, and like they could like enjoy their proclivities, but like they were a unit.
Barry and Diane, in other words.
Yeah, exactly. But
like
I think
got it. Okay.
Yeah. So like things relationships like that, like it's being toyed with now. And I think unless the manosphere can build that bridge, things are gonna change.
Yeah. Interesting.
Anyway.
Well, guys, we've been talking to Abha, who joins us from Kerala, India, at her nighttime. So Abha, first and foremost, like, thanks for being off hours with us. And this has been, I mean, just utterly fascinating for a bunch of reasons that I didn't expect when we started the conversation. So thank you. Like, that's been super cool. Where can the kids find you, as they say?
Yeah, I'm on Substack. I think it's girlonline.in. You can find me there.
Fabulous.
All right, so girlonline.in, and of course you can find Kyle at The Trend Report. You can find me at Sick Weekly, and you can find us here every Tuesday, at least in the eastern coast of America, as hip replacement. So we'll be back next week with another guest. But Abha, thank you for joining us, and Kyle, as always, wonderful to talk to you.
Thank you so much,
Abha.
Illuminating.
Fab.
You're welcome. All right, and we'll talk to you again. Looking forward to talking to you again, Abha.
Me too.